The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
In the past 10 years, the number of women serving in the California Legislature has declined steadily. Why? And why does it matter? We ask one of the state's leading advocates for more gender diversity in office. The game is politics, and the game is on. Our guest today is Mary Hughes, veteran political strategist and founder of Close the Gap California, a movement devoted to reversing the 10-year trend in which the number of women in the state legislature has steadily declined. And it's worth adding that the California trend is matched by a national trend across the country in which there's been either a decline in the number of women in office or reached a certain threshold and sort of froze in place. Mary, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark, for having me.
This is an interesting issue. Tell me why the numbers have gone down. I can remember the year of the woman when a whole bunch of women won office, and I was looking at some national statistics and also the California statistics, and there's been a steady decline, and the question is why?
Well, first of all, it depends on where you look. We did have a great year in 1992, largest number of women ever to go into the Congress in one election. That was terrific. But we thought the gates were going to open up and everything would be continuous progress, and that hasn't been the case. In 2012, however, we did have an uptick again, but understand what that uptick means. It means the difference between 17% and 18%. So even in the Congress, if there is progress, it's very tiny. Here in California, we've had a decade of stall, not much progress at all.
And recently a decline.
And we have had a decline, particularly in the state assembly. Our Senate has been flat the last decade, but the Assembly has lost 5 or 6 women. So we thought this was a time to say, you know what? With the problems we face, we could do so much better if all the talent was at work on California.
Instead of half of it.
Instead of half.
So let's understand, why do you think this has happened? Because I can remember 92 as a dramatic year in which we thought a lot of things were going to change. Why hasn't that success been built on to the extent that a lot of people expected it to be?
Research tells us there are a lot of different reasons, and some of those have to do with the hard partisanship we see now. Mm-hmm. It has to do with the invasion of privacy that everyone understands you experience when you step into the light. But I think women are especially sensitive to the fact that they put their families at risk. There's the issue
Men don't care as much about that?
Well, I don't know if they do or they don't. I just know that women are willing to talk about it. Yeah. There's the amount of money it takes to fuel a candidacy. Even for our state legislature, it can be millions of dollars. And so there are a variety of factors. But on the upside, what we know is that women who are in the state legislatures across the country, when you ask them, what was your aha moment? Why did you choose to run? They say, because I was asked. Mm.
Whereas most men I know who run for office don't wait to be asked, they start asking.
They self-nominate.
Self-nominate,
yes.
Yeah. Is there something particular about, does this reflect the smaller numbers of women in executive level positions in industry? I mean, you look at where candidates come from. They come from city councils, they come from legislatures, they come from business, they come from business leaders, they're community leaders often. Is there just fewer women in those areas as well? Does that reflect, because those are the bona fides that people use in which they end up being asked to run?
I think that that's right. Women have traditionally come up, like men have, through a pipeline of service at the local level. There are fewer women on our county boards of supervisors. There are fewer women here in the Bay Area. It's quite striking, actually. If you look at our area, where we have been a national leader, think back. 2 women senators, first woman Speaker of the House of Representatives, 6 women in Congress, many women served in our state legislature. And now, and all 3 cities have been led, Oakland, San Jose, San Francisco, all led by women. Not now, not now.
So it's really a matter of developing a bench.
Yes and no. This phenomenon of the diminishing number of women the higher you go is true across sectors in our country. Mm-hmm. And here's the challenge. There are no more than 22% of executives or decision makers in any industry. And depending where you look, if you're looking at women on boards of the Fortune 500, you're looking at 3 to 5% being women. So the issue is, what happens as women get higher and higher in their fields, and why aren't women in government leading? And this is an interesting challenge. If you think about it, government usually sets the standard for what others feel they have to do in the private and nonprofit sector. But with fewer...
I'm sorry, explain that to me, that sets the standard, because most people think the opposite is true.
If there's going to be a social change, government and
okay.
that we value what women contribute, then it's usually the government that says, we need to include these people. We need to make sure we have all of this talent at our disposal. That then sets a standard. People don't come in to lobby women in the legislature without a woman in their lobbying team, for example. Companies don't come, communities don't send just one group. They send a group that reflects who they are. And that's the standard when you have women in decision-making positions that changes how other people organize their company, their group, whatever it is. When you don't have women, then there isn't quite the impetus to open up doors.
Well, okay, so we have a graphic that shows the dramatic decline in the number of women in the legislature. As I was joking off there, it sort of looks like my stock portfolio, but is there a specific reason why this is happening in California? Because I did look up some statistics, both on the Close the Gap website, and I should say I described it as a movement. It's really a campaign. But also, looking around the rest of the country, it seems really striking in California, especially because the state had a reputation for putting more women in office than other states did. Is there a specific California reason why this is happening?
Well, I think that there are a couple things. One, I referenced earlier the big success that we have had in the 90s. And I think that there was a general sense, we've got this. This has worked out now. We've got lots of women coming up. That proved not to be true. So one of the reasons that Close the Gap California is focused on recruiting is because we have an opportunity that is very limited. In the 14 and 16 elections, half of our legislature is going to turn over. And after that, anyone who's elected will be in the House of Origin for 12 years if they want to be. And that means many fewer open seats, many fewer opportunities for women. So in the term-limited world, there was a sense among women, the women's political community, that term limits would mean many more women would go into these open seats. That didn't happen. And we're not exactly sure why it didn't happen, but it could be that women feel less opportunity when they can only stay someplace for 6 years.
Yeah. Let me stop you there. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. We'll be right back on The Game.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon, joined by Mary Hughes, founder of Close the Gap California, a campaign to bring more women into the California Legislature and reverse about a decade-old trend now of the declining number. Why does gender matter? Aren't everybody's positions on the issues the same regardless of gender?
They're not, actually. And we know a fair amount about this, but not nearly enough. So let me try to make the case that gender matters first and foremost because you and I are different. That difference has value, and that value needs to be part of the public conversation, or the decisions that are made in a way that is skewed toward some concerns and not others.
The idea that those differences are valued, you know, in our lifetime, that wasn't the case. That women were not valued for the difference they brought to a discussion. And so have we made progress at least on that front, or is this some of it a reflection of sort of a retrenching back to an old mindset?
I think that we've made progress, but I think the progress, first of all, is never, as your wonderful chart showed, never steady. And I think it's fits and starts. And here's what I mean. We know a little bit about the value that women bring to the legislative process in terms of agenda setting. Because our experience is different, we are likely to put things on the agenda or bring things to a policy discussion from a perspective that may not have been present earlier.
What kind of things?
Well, if we're talking about childcare, we're talking about a wage gap, something that our campaign cares about a lot. It's not that long ago that Sandra Day O'Connor couldn't get a job here on the peninsula, couldn't practice the law, got offered a job as a secretary. The big gap, big wage gap there. There are still wage gaps. And so if you've been on the short end of that, that's a different comment in a hearing than somebody who hasn't but read about it. And so that our personal experience matters in terms of writing policies that are not there yet.
So the issue that leaps to mind, of course, is abortion and abortion rights, and the movement in a number of states to really restrict them, sort of one state at a time, and things like require an intrusive ultrasound of some sort before you're allowed to get an abortion. What you're saying, it sounds like, is if there were women more equally involved in that discussion might not even be taking place or might be dramatically different.
Well, here I want to distinguish for you. The answer to your question, I believe, is yes. But probably on this issue, the most important thing is understanding that all women would like to see greater access to health care and reproductive health care. What we experience in California is so dramatically different in terms of choice and restrictions on abortion rights because we are blessed to be a more progressive state. What we hope is that more progressive women in the legislature will push back here even to a greater place. So while we are not at risk in California of losing our rights, because we're progressive and because progressive women want to go forward, we have an obligation not to sit where we are, but to show others that we can do even better on policies that take care of women's reproductive health. And I think we need to do that. And it's our expectation that with more progressive women, we would be able to do more.
Yeah.
And let me be specific about that,
Yeah.
Mark. Many people do not know that almost half the counties in California do not offer access to reproductive health for the women who live in those counties. So when we say
You mean there
we're
simply
better
aren't
off,
like a
there are no
Planned Parenthood
facilities,
clinic or
there's
anything?
no clinic. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So that's when I say we've got to not hold the line here because we are a progressive state. We've got to show what it should be.
Yeah. How would that whole debate change? You and I had a private conversation one day talking about shifting the emphasis from the issue of abortion or no abortion to the larger question. The way we characterized it was lots of people don't really want people to have abortions. They want people to have the choice to do so, but we'd prefer to have programs that were advancing that abortion isn't necessary, that choices can be made that prevent that decision from having to be one that has to be made.
That's right.
You think that would also be something that having more women in the legislature changes the nature of that discussion fundamentally?
I do. And I think here we're talking about not only health, we're talking about education, we're talking about an openness to say what is healthy sexuality, how do we teach kids about that, how do we understand what our responsibilities are, the maturity that women bring when they introduce these subjects, when they build policies around them, is something I think that would be refreshing and might help us a lot get out of the bind we're in, where people just don't want, they're tired of the conversation. We're not threatened in California. Let's move on to something else.
On the topic of does gender matter, a lot of people are just sick and tired of the way government's being conducted, especially at the federal level.
Right.
To a lesser degree at the state level because the state's finances, I think, got a little better. Does having more women make that better? Does it make gridlock better?
You know, again, we know when women are present in a legislative body, they will change the procedures. They are the ones who carry ethics reform legislation. Women are the ones who open up proceedings and make sure that they are inclusive. They're advocates for transparency.
Let me stop you there. Hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break and we'll come right back to that very same question. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. We're talking about the declining numbers of women holding elective office here in California and across the country. Mary Hughes, founder of Close the Gap California, a campaign to reverse that trend, is here to talk about these things. We have a chart that shows the decline in California. It shows that it went in the past decade from 30 to 26% women in the legislature, mostly in the assembly where the losses have taken place. We were talking about does gender matter, in particular about this gridlock that frustrates everybody, this hardline partisanship. And you were saying you think it makes it better because women are sort of process inclusive, if you will, about how things get done. But you think about the first woman that comes to mind is Michelle Bachmann, who was certainly part and parcel of the gridlock. So it's not monolithic by any means that women all behave the same way.
No, not at all.
So how can you be sure that this is going to have the kind of positive impact you're talking about?
Well, first of all, our campaign is designed to recruit progressive women who have an interest.
You mean liberals and Democrats?
I do, but I want to focus on closing the gap. These are women who are interested in closing the gender gap in representation, but specifically interested in closing the access gap to health care, the wage gap between men and women, the achievement gap, the very disturbing and widening gap between rich and poor in California. And so those are progressive women. and those are the ones we want to see in office. And the difference they make isn't just a procedural matter, although I spoke to that earlier. It's what they put on the agenda. It's how they perceive their obligations. Unfortunately, at 26%, we really don't know what a cadre of women from both parties, what effect they might have, because social scientists tell us we need roughly 30% or a third. We got very close, we got to 30%, but we've actually never seen in any of our legislatures, there are several, Colorado, Washington State, I think Vermont, maybe close now to 40, but there you're seeing some effect of women. One example I can give you that is interesting on the issue of polarization is the United States Senate, where we now have 20 women of the 100-member body. And on several very important pieces of legislation that were in question, women have crossed party lines to put the legislation through. The Violence Against Women Act was one of those. That was very important. They have...
The sexual misconduct in the military is an issue that may not have even been raised, is what you're saying.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Senator Gillibrand has taken the lead there in the Senate. Our own Congresswoman Jackie Speer in the House has been very vocal on this topic. But absent those women, and enough women to pressure the leadership, that's a tough issue. You know, putting all that out in public, women will demand that. So those are the kinds of differences to bring things into light that aren't right and deal with them.
Let's talk about the campaign. What are you doing? I think we have the website for the organization we can show on the screen while you're talking, in case people are interested, in case they want to have somebody to ask them to run for office. So what's the campaign consist of?
We are bringing together in regions around the state that have clusters of open seats in 14 and 16, the heads of organizations that traditionally have cared about this. Of course, those are women's political organizations traditionally, but also women's organizations that have, just as part of their mission, like the Junior League and AAUW and others who are not focused on politics, but part of their mission is women's leadership, and asking them to become a regional search party, being in touch with them to say, who are women you admire in this community, who have led positive changes, who have the stature to make a difference, and then getting in touch with those women and talking about them, about the difference that they could make in the legislature.
If women wait to be asked, then the campaign is let's go ask them?
Exactly.
Yeah. And what's your goal? I mean, do you have a percentage in mind? Of, obviously better than 26.
It is. I think we'd very much like to get to 45 members if possible. I think that it's going to be...
so 40, not 45%, 45
no,
total.
That's
so what
right.
percent would that be?
Mark, I'm not exactly
Well, it's 120
sure.
members of the legislature, so somewhere in there.
Our goal is...
We shouldn't be doing math on this show.
No, we shouldn't be doing math on your show. Definitely not my strong suit. But what I can tell you is this. If we get to over that 1/3 hump, we will begin to be able to see the difference that women collectively can have on the agenda, on the outcome, on the content of legislation, on the procedures that we employ. A good example just in this last budget cycle was the leadership that Holly Mitchell showed. She, as one of the folks who had responsibility for the cuts to those most dependent on government services, she held the line and got a lot of support from women in the legislature and from her party. But she needed to be very vocal, very clear, organize outside the legislature to make sure we held on to some semblance of a decent safety net.
We're nearing the end of the show, and I don't want the topic to pass without asking your take on what's going on in New York with Eliot Spitzer running, given his history, and Anthony Weiner running, given not only his history but his very recent history. What does it say about the environment you're talking about in your own campaign? Does it say anything?
There seems to me to be a continuation of Bumbleino on whether you go back 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years, we're having men commenting on things in disrespectful or silly ways, people who, are all about church and family falling off their pedestals. And the roadway seems kind of littered as you go forward with hypocrisy and poor judgment and a willing to take advantage of the voters if you can. If they'll believe you, and I think that our politics suffers for it. But perhaps most importantly, I think it truly highlights the need for more women. We do make a difference. We do focus people differently. And so in those particular cases, frankly, I think Elliot Spitzer and Mr. Anthony Weiner are very different characters. Their careers have been very different. Both had personal shortcomings that we've all seen too much of, and I think they're going to end up in very different places.
Yeah. I want to talk real briefly. We're just about out of time, but you're doing a series of programs around the state and around the Bay Area where if people are interested in this, they can come and get, I guess, training, for lack of a better word, at least get exposed to this.
No, actually, we are focused like a laser beam on recruiting. Mm-hmm. That is all we do. In our state, we have built a lot of infrastructure to train people, to help them raise money, to teach them about policy. That's not what we do, just recruiting.
Okay, Mary Hughes of Close the Gap, California, thank you for being with us, and thank you for joining us. Join us next time on The Game.